Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and I'm here today with my top 10 nonfiction reads of 2024. So I'm planning to put this out on Thursday. The Tuesday before, you would have seen my top 10 fiction reads. This is the first time I've done this, so it was actually kind of fun to do. I don't know why I've resisted doing it. And as I said in the other video, if you are friends with me on Facebook on my personal page, you will already know these lists because I already posted them. But also, if you know me well enough to know my last name and I would recognize your name and you want to send me a friend request, I am easily findable on Facebook. So there you go. Anyway, let's get down to it. So I had, this was actually a harder list to put together than the fiction list because most of the, I just ranked my top 5 and then I took all my 5 stars on fiction list and ranked them. And then I went through and found my top 2 or 3, however many it was, 4.5 stars and put those at the end. Well, for nonfiction, all of these are 5 stars and I had more than 10 5-star books. So I just had to decide on my favorite children, apparently. But let's get started. Also, I did a lot of these on audio, so I don't have the physical books. Of the ones I do have a physical book, they're here, but mostly I'm gonna be putting pictures up there. So at number 10, I have a book that I read way back in January and I still think about, and this is Better Living Through Birding by Christian Cooper. So if you don't know, Christian Cooper was the gentleman who was birdwatching, African-American gentleman who was birdwatching one day in Central Park and some lady called the cops on him. That is just like 0.1% of this man's life, and his life is pretty remarkable. He was a comic books artist, he's an activist, so many things going on in his life. And this is just a great memoir, but I appreciate how he gave that one incident the right amount of due that it deserves, which is not that much. So he's a really inspiring person. This is a great audiobook. He reads it himself. He has since gone on actually to win an Emmy Award. He was hosting a show on the National Geographic channel about birdwatching, which makes sense. National Geographic decided to change its direction, which is always frightening when a channel does that. But they aren't continuing with the show, but he won an Emmy for it, so it wasn't his fault. But I highly recommend this one, and I hope we see more of him in the future. At number 9, this is one that I know a lot of people read because it was part of the BookTube prize. I think it might have medaled this year. I can't quite remember. But this is How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair or Sophia Sinclair. I've heard it both ways. So Sinclair is a poet. She was raised in Jamaican and a Rastafarian family, and her childhood was hard. Her father was a very devout Rastafarian, which I didn't know anything about the Rastafarian religion going into this book, so I learned quite a lot there. But he also, I think, suffered with a fair amount of mental illness. So she really had a tough time as a child growing up, but she and her siblings are remarkable people, and they were able to really kind of rise above and escape that life and be successful in their own right. And as I said, Sinclair is a poet, so the writing in this is very beautiful. Now, I read this. I know a lot of people who listen to the audiobook, and people either really love the audiobook or they had problems with the audiobook. So I can't speak to that. I'm just putting that out there if you're interested to kind of keep that in mind. It might be a great success and it might not work for you, which is really what you'd say about any audiobook, but whatever. But as I said, I read it, really enjoyed it. 5 stars, it's on my list. Okay, number 8 is one that I've actually been meaning to read for quite some time, and finally the BookTube prize finally got me to do it, and that is Master, Slave, Husband, Wife by Il-Yan Wu. And this tells the story that I don't know why we all don't know this story, to tell you the truth. I mean, this is a remarkable story, and I don't know why it isn't something that people know, of the Crafts. So the Crafts were an enslaved couple shortly before the Civil War. They were married, and Mrs. Craft was very light-skinned to the point that she could pass as white, which really bothers me. The people, I'm time travel here, but could go back and first of all be okay with slavery because slavery's bad, but then they have this idea it's slavery. These are different people. They look different. So therefore this is not what I believe, but this was kind of their mindset. Therefore inferior and slavery's okay. Again, I don't agree with that. That was their mindset. But then seeing someone who looks just like them in that group, I don't understand the mental gymnastics people had to go through to make that okay. But anyway, the Crafts put together this plan to escape their enslavement by Mrs. Craft. I forgot their first names. It's Robert is the husband. I forgot the woman's name. Anyway, she dressed up as a white man with some disabilities, and he was her slave, and they traveled north. And they went shortly before, I believe, the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. So while they're in the North, the Fugitive Slave Act is enacted. And they were sort of a celebrity thing. So it was like a big feather in people's hats to like capture them and bring them back. So they had to like escape all that again. They ended up in England. They wrote books. And I am shocked that people don't know this story. But you know, I think it might have had something to do with the color of their skin, and people remember other stories. But anyway, really, it's like an adventure novel, almost reading it. Highly recommend. All of these are highly recommended. Obviously, they were all 5 stars. Number 7 is a late edition. I finished it 2 days before filming this. This is actually the reason why I've waited to do this list, because when I filmed the my best fiction, I was about in the middle of this and I was pretty sure it was going to make the list, and it was just a question of where. So here we go. And that is The Rooster House by Victoria Bellum. So this is mostly set in 2014, which is important. So Victoria Bellum was born in the Ukraine, lived there until she was about 14, and then she immigrated to the United States with her mother and stepfather, and then her father and stepmother also immigrated kind of separately. So teenage up through adult, she lived in the United States, and then as a professional adult, married adult, she moved to Belgium with her husband's job. She's a freelance writer. So she was in Europe, but not in Ukraine, and I guess she'd been back to Ukraine a couple times, but really hadn't spent meaningful time there since she left as a teenager. So in October 14, well, I don't know if it was October, in 2014, in case you forgot, was the second to most recent time Russia invaded the Ukraine. And it is this time that she decides to go back to Ukraine and see her grandmother and see family members who are there. But there's a lot of kind of undercurrents as to why she's going there as well. She's dealing with the grief of her father, although I don't think she realizes that she's dealing with the grief of her father until a couple threads kind of converge. She's trying to put together her family story. She is curious about the state of affairs in Ukraine. So there's a lot going on there. And that almost sounds like a recipe for disaster in a book, having so much going on. But Bellum constructed this book so well that everything falls into place in a way that the reader doesn't feel overwhelmed, if that makes sense. She gives you as I said, she's dealing with her father's, with the grief of her father's death, but she doesn't quite realize it to the end, and she paces that really well so it comes together. I think it's really eye-opening to see sort of like the influence, how there was still such a strong Soviet influence in 2014. And, Ukraine is a very different country now, obviously, because it's in another war, but under Zelensky, it was a very different country than it was under previous leaders. So we kind of forget that, I think. So we see kind of what Ukraine was like. We see the lasting effects of the Soviet Union and the lasting effects of World War II. It has history, genealogy. If you like genealogy, there's that in there. It has all of that, and it just comes together so well. Okay, number 6. This book saved me from the pit of despair that I had after the combination of the election and reading The Demon of Unrest, and that is Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy, which has a hardcover to see because it shines. I'm going to try not to throw it across the room like I accidentally did the last book. This is by Karen Abbott, 4 women undercover in the Civil War. So this book is about 4 women undercover in the Civil War. 2 are for the Confederacy and 2 are for the Union. And they all 3 of the 4 sort of kind of orbit each other, like they kind of know of each other, I should say. They aren't acquaintances really, but they know of each other. That's the 2 Confederate women and one of the women working for the Union. The 4th woman, who is the other one who's working for the Union, is a woman who goes undercover as a man to fight in the war. which was a little unsettling at first because this book is about 10 years old and the language we have around things such as transgenderism has changed since then. So I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. Was it a transgendered man with language we no longer use, or was it a woman undercover as a man? It is a woman undercover as a man. As the book goes along, you realize that is the case, that she really does identify as a woman the entire time, as undercover as a man. And I said this before, the two Union women are really inspiring. They are really just inspiring women and, role models. We should know they should be household names. The two Confederate women prove that all the stereotypes we have about Southern belles are probably true. There's a 17-year-old named Belle Boyd who is Scarlett O'Hara. I mean, the opening line of Gone with the Wind is Scarlett O'Hara is not beautiful, but men seldom realize that when struck by her charm, or caught by her charm. Can't remember the exact word. That is Belle Boyd. She's not an attractive woman, but like men are just falling all over her. And then the other woman is, I have to look up her name, Rose O'Neal Greenhow, who's kind of brassier. She was already on the outs of society a little bit because she was a widow with a lot of gentleman callers, and that was not, okay. So she reminds me a lot of Blanche Devereaux. I almost said Blanche Dubois. That's another Southern heroine, Blanche Devereaux. That sort of brassy, I'm flirting with all the men, highly driven woman. So it's interesting to see those play out into stereotypes that we actually know so well, but they aren't stereotypes, if that makes any sense. In any case, this reads like an adventure novel. So if you like war stories and adventure novels and stories about really strong women, some of whom you'll admire, this is a great one. Okay, put that over there so it doesn't go across the room. Okay, number 5 is one that I did recently read just in the last 2 months, I think. And that is Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America by Barbara McQuade. Now, Barbara McQuade is a former U.S. attorney. She is now a commentator on either CNN or MSNBC. As I said when I shared my thoughts on that book, I am like anti-cable news, so I don't watch cable news, so I don't know which one she's on. However, she's also on a podcast that I listen to called #Sisters-in-Law, where she's on with Joyce White Vance, who's also a U.S. attorney, and then 2 other attorneys, where they just talk about legally what's going on. It's a fantastic podcast. Highly recommend it. But I went into this book thinking I knew all about disinformation. Like I knew what it was, all this. I'm a savvy person. But I learned so much in this book. McQuade goes all the way back and she explains what disinformation really is. It's not just stuff that's wrong. I mean, it's a conscious decision to put out false information, disinformation in an attempt to confuse or redirect people. She talks about the history of it, the founding father of this. I mean, it went back a long time, but the person who really put this into effect was Hitler. And then she also talks about the psychology as to why humans are susceptible to it. And she talks about how it has played in the most recent part of our US history. This was released before the election, so it's weird reading it after the election. And then she tells us what we can do to combat it. And some of it are things that the government can do, and some are things that we personally can do. And I really appreciated that. If you remember, I had read a book just before this one where I did not like the book, and they did not give us those action steps. And I felt that was one of the really bad things about that book. And here McQuade really does give us those. I think this is a really important book to read because the truth of the matter is, sadly, disinformation has worked in the last 8 to 10 years. It has. Look, this is where we are now. Disinformation has worked. So they're going to continue doing it. So if we want to stop that, we need to learn how to combat it. And I think this is the best I've read way of combating disinformation. So I want you all to read this book soon, so we can, we got to gird our loins for 2025. Okay, and then Number 4, and this is another one with kind of sentimental meaning to me, because I buddy read this with Kim Peronish, Kim's book Life, who passed away just recently. And that is a book that a lot of people have read, and it took me a long time to read it because I was a little scared of reading it. I knew how sad it was. And that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. As you can tell, tab this one up. If you don't know, Chanel Miller was the Emily Doe in the Brock Turner case, whose victim statement went viral. It was a beautifully written victim statement, and this is her book. So it actually does have her victim statement in it if you want to read it. But she was sexually assaulted by Brock Turner, and really in a really horrific way. And Brock Turner basically got a slap on the wrist over it, and there was a lot of outrage, as there should be. But Chanel Miller is a just phenomenal writer. And so I have a problem with a lot of memoirs in that they kind of they aren't honest with themselves sometimes. Like, they don't always cop up to their own shortcomings, these sorts of things. She is very honest. She does not hold back, and she really, it's hard to be a memoirist and be objective. I don't even think that's possible, but she's as close to objective as you can probably get. Not objective in that there's no emotional backing to it, but objective in that she actually is very honest with what she says. So really highly recommend this one. It took me a long time to read. Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So the next 3, along with Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, I read for the BookTube Prize. How to Say Babylon was also in the BookTube Prize, but I read it on my own. Number 3 was the book I did not want to read. And that is King, A Life by Jonathan Eig. I was very intimidated by it. I also was like, why do we need another biography of Martin Luther King? Well, we need another biography of Martin Luther King because recently a trove of documents regarding him have been declassified. So Jonathan Eig was able to write this biography with new information that hadn't been available, and that is always a good thing to do. Martin Luther King is a complicated person in history, and he's a complicated person in my history because my parents really didn't like him, and I grew up being told things about him, some of which were true and some very much were not true. And I just, for a long time I struggled with what to think about him, and I can't say that I don't still struggle because there are really problematic things about him. But I feel like I struggle with him in the way you should struggle with him now, if that makes any sense. I really think this is an important book to read because it helps to combat generally the cult of personality. We put these people up on pedestals and we turn our blind eye to some really kind of negative things about them. So Martin Luther King did so many good things for this country. Also was really awful to women. So we have to learn to be able to look at leaders, public figures, and see the whole picture and not just the shiny, pretty parts. And I think that this book really shows us that. Number 2, surprising me more than anybody else, is a science book. I am a history person. This is Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution by Kat Bohannon. So it's pretty clear what this book is about from the title. It does talk about evolution and the role that females played in it, so the female organism. And it's told very much in a way that is engaging for people like myself who aren't really science people. So it's really fun to listen to, and she's got a sense of humor in it. I know some people who are more sciencey had some issues with it, and I think that might be a case of this just being a book for people who aren't into science. I think that's just it, because I think she just addressed things in ways that maybe if you're looking at it from a scientific viewpoint, it might not have been perfect. I am not that person. I am the person who reads history books, so I'm okay. But what I really appreciated about this book is it made me reframe the way I look at the role of women or females in all aspects of history. We're taught, way back, prehistory, men were out hunting and feeding, and the women were just, they were the gatherers and all this, but everything was driven forward by the men. And that is very clearly not true. Very clearly not true. Obviously, obviously, you needed both males and females for evolution, okay? And if you can't get that far, This is going to be a book that really irritates you. I would never give my husband this book because his mind would explode. Let's just put it that way. He would have a hard time dealing with the fact that males aren't the center of everything. But it really changed the way I looked at things. And of all the books on this list, this is the one that probably changed my view of the world the most. So listen to this on audio, great audio. And finally, my number one nonfiction book of the year. And this was another BookTube prize book. And I was just heartbroken that it didn't make it to the finals because it was my favorite. And that is A Fever in the Heartland by Timothy Egan. There's more about the Ku Klux Klan, but of course on my list, I just wrote down A Fever in the Heartland. So this is about a case, specifically, this is about a case in the 1920s of the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana, and a crime that happened around it involving a woman. And we go into that. So it's very true crimey around that, which if you like true crime, you'll like this. But it also talks more about why the Ku Klux Klan was so successful at that time. And it addresses why it was successful in other areas beyond the Midwest, like Oregon, which has a really dark history of the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, we like to think we're all progressive, but we've got our dark history. But what really got me about this book, and I'm going to just go right to it here. You swap the white hoods for red caps and we're still there. It's chilling. It is chilling how little has changed and why we are still in this world. And it's so easy to look at things in the past and say, oh, well, look at that. Like, look at how silly we were then. Look at the things, we've changed since then. We have not changed. If we had changed, we would have a different incoming president, but we have not changed. As I said, there's no difference between white hoods and red hats. So, it really was disturbing, but it was also so enthralling. Like, I just could not put this story down. I had to know what happened. Really highly recommend this one. I highly recommend all of them. They're 5 stars, but that was my number one. So there you go. Those are my top 10 nonfiction books for 2024. 2 days ago, you would have seen my fiction. So go back and see that if you want to see what that is. And now I'm filming this on the 31st of December. So I'm looking forward to 2025 reading. So let me know what your top nonfiction books were of 2024, and subscribe, join my Discord, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.